All right, welcome. My name is Victoria Leo, and I am a bona fide anthropologist. I teach a 7-class series called Anthro is Fun at Southern Oregon University's OLLI, the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. Non-credit, no tests, um, but if for some reason you don't happen to live in Ashland, Oregon, and you don't have a chance to do things live, I'm offering here a very quick and abbreviated version of the classes. Okay, so this is the first part of session 1 of Anthro is Fun, and uh, we're we're offering an introduction to the science of humanity. Anthropology means, in Greek, the study of anthropos, which means human beings. All right, so we're looking at human biological evolution through natural selection and through other mechanisms, and and we're also looking at human culture and human language and what we can learn from primates and what we learn from digging human artifacts out of the ground, archaeology, and the way people approach specialty topics like medicine. The various ways that people look at, the process of being ill, the process of being well. What does it mean to be ill? What are the forms of illness? All the kind of stuff. Oh, it's really cool stuff. Anyway, so if you would like to find out more about me, and I hope you will, my website is soaringdragon.biz, soaringdragon.biz. If you like Facebook, I have a Facebook group called Healing Minds, Healing Bodies. Now, my degree and some of my early work was in anthropology. I've kept up with the field over the years. I taught college level anthropology part-time while I was doing other things. But these days, my work is involved in health and wellness, and also the form of, quote, health and wellness, where I'm working directly with entrepreneurs and writers and creatives, people who can't afford to have a wasted moment. You can't, if you're a small business owner or you're thinking about becoming a small business owner, you cannot afford to procrastinate and waste time. So if you have blockages, if you have small things, big things that are holding you back, wasting your time, causing you to doubt yourself and worry and that's always a sign. I have the mental health training skills, and please don't let the word mental health frighten you off, okay? Just don't, okay? Just what it means is that I'm bound by a huge amount of ethical guidelines that coaches and spiritual healers and all kinds of, other unlicensed people don't have to worry about, right? So it is protection for you to work with somebody who is a licensed mental health professional. Anyway, who cares? The fact is, you're in good hands if you're working with me, right? And I've got the tools, hypnotherapy, Reiki energy healing, tapping, etc., to blast through those barriers in the smallest amount of time possible. I don't think anybody should be working or enjoying life at less than their full capacity for 5 seconds longer than they absolutely have to. And I am absolutely adamant about that. So my solutions, my packages, my programs always involve getting you there, getting you blasting through the barriers, getting you to where you want to be, either with physical health or breaking apart the barriers that are stopping you in your mind. And don't let oh, I'm fine. There's nothing wrong with my mind. My beliefs are good. Don't let that whole pride thing stand in your way. If you're not every single minute of the day, there may be things that are holding you back. So don't let it happen. All right. Back to anthropology. I'm going to screen share, and with any kind of luck, it's going to work. Let's see. I am not the techie meister. Okay, here we are. And hopefully this is actually working. I'm going to go into this mode. All right, cool. This is all my contact information. Obviously you're finding me on YouTube. Oh yeah, I have a Pinterest account. Isn't that fun? You can find me on Google Plus. I've got a blog, Soaring Dragon in Japan.blogspot. And of course I have a LinkedIn account. Remember, I'm Victoria C. Leo. There's a Victoria Leo who's an actress, and there's another Victoria C. Leo, I think, who's an Australian supermodel. As you can tell, I'm not any kind of Australian or any kind of supermodel. So here we go. All right, so when we're talking about anthropology, let me get rid of this. Come on, go away. When we're talking about anthropology, we're looking at both culture and biology. In the first, this episode and episodes 2 and 3, we're going to be looking at human biology. In episode 2, we're looking at human evolution from 7 million years ago, when our first ancestors were walking upright on with a habitual bipedal, meaning on 2 feet. God bless Latin, bipedal stance. From then up to the dawn of Homo sapiens at 200,000 years ago, and episode 3 will go through Homo sapiens and all of our travels around the world. All right, now, sometime prior to 7 million years ago, we had a common ancestor with what are today chimpanzees and bonobos. Our ancestor didn't look like today's chimpanzees. They've been evolving for 7 million years also. But we did have a common ancestor. It's like we're first cousins, very, very closely related. So let's talk about what is anthropology, the science of humanity. We're looking at humanity in the past, in the present, and in the future. And what we're looking at is the science of humanity. So conclusions that anthropologists come to are based on data. They're based on evidence. 3 anecdotes are not proof. Using samples that are biased is not proof. And I have a master's degree in anthropology with a focus on biological anthropology. That's why I did a lot of work in medicine and biology. And I also have a master's in psychology. So I'm going to give you an example of what is not science. For example, you're a psychologist and you want to come to a conclusion about human mating preferences. Who do we fall in love with, right? And what you do is you go to your freshman or sophomore psychology undergraduates at Penn State University, and you ask them a series of questions, and you analyze their answers, and then you write a research paper and try to get it published. Which unfortunately you do succeed in getting published. Psychology. with conclusions about humanity. Okay, what's wrong with that? Well, for example, 19-year-old teenagers in America who are upper middle class, at least, at a major expensive university. So these kids are kids. They don't have any actual experience with relationships. They're all Americans. They're all rich, white Americans. And you're using that to draw conclusions about the 8 billion, I think it's 8 billion people on planet Earth with all the myriad cultures and biologies and ages. And it's insane. So a lot of psychology is not good science. And I'm not the first person to say this, or even the 10,000th person to say this. But I will say that anthropology tries really hard because we are the science that has been looking at all of humanity and all the cultures on Earth for a long, long time. So we're more attuned to making sure that what we're studying is not a biased sample. Okay. Now, what science does for us, and there's a tremendous amount that science can do because it involves testable predictions. Okay. And now that means that not only does there have to be a way to prove that whatever you're proposing, whatever you're testing, can be true, there also has to be a way to prove that what you're testing is false. Okay, if you can't falsify it, it's not a testable hypothesis or prediction. Okay, that's very, very important because that's a big difference between science and, you know, the way you and I ordinarily think in our, you know, our day-to-day thinking about things. Okay, it also has to be reproducible. So, for example, if I, in my vegetable garden, if I decide to reproduce Gregor Mendel's pea experiment, if his conclusions are valid science, then I'm going to get the same conclusions. And so are you, and so is Bob, and so is somebody in Mozambique, because if it's true, then it's true all the time. It's gravity works everywhere on Earth, and in fact, everywhere in the known universe, right? Because gravity is a fact. So whatever results you get have to be reproducible. If they're not reproducible, if you get different answers when somebody else does the exact same experiment, then it's not a valid result. Okay, it's not true unless it's true all the time. Okay, now that doesn't mean you can't have outliers. You know, for example, smoking and drinking and eating a terrible diet, you know, and never exercising. If you're looking at large numbers of people, statistically speaking, that is going to take 8.9 years off your life. So telling me that your Uncle Al did all those things and he died in his bed of old age at 97 doesn't change the science, because nobody ever said that every single individual who does this is going to die at age 72. That's not science. When we're talking about humanity, we're talking about health, we're talking about statistically what's the probability, okay? Now, one of the things that ordinary non-scientists get confused about is the difference between causality and correlation. Just because one thing happens and then something else happens does not mean that the first thing caused the second thing, all right? I'll give you an example from a famous joke. Right? Whiskey and water, vodka and water, and bourbon and water all cause drunkenness. Therefore, water causes drunkenness. right? No. Actually, in fact, you can drink water until the cows come home, and you may run into health problems. You know, you can kill yourself if you overhydrate yourself. But there's another goodness, excuse me. There's another common element there, of course, which is alcohol, right? Another old joke. In the last decade, the profits of the whiskey manufacturers, the rum manufacturers in Jamaica has gone up 27%. And so has the salary of the Anglican ministers in Jamaica. So therefore, the ministers are profiting from the rum trade. It's 27%. One thing happened and the other thing happened. Well, they're not related to each other. It's just a correlation. You saw those two things happen. You need to do more in-depth study to decide whether there's causality, whether one caused the other. From a science perspective, people can, shoot their mouth off on any subject as long as they're not pretending that it's science. So in that particular example, what's happening is the inflation rate was 27%. So the price of everything went up 27%. Okay. Now, causality means one thing caused something else. In order for scientists to prove that cigarette smoking causes lung cancer and other problems, there needed to be a very, very clear and unassailable, it could not be caused by anything else, a series of experiments. Okay, I should have turned my phone off. I'm so sorry. All right, so in a lot of cases, what you've got is something is necessary to something else, but not sufficient, right? In order for a person to get breast cancer, actually, that's not a good example because men do get breast cancer. Pretend that they don't, okay? I could say, how about ovarian cancer? That's a better one. In order for a person to get ovarian cancer, it is necessary for them to have ovaries. It's necessary for them to be biologically female, okay? But it's not enough because every single woman doesn't get ovarian cancer. So in a lot of, especially when you're doing medical anthropology and you're looking at the things that cause illness, things can be necessary but not sufficient. There's a lot of medicine that goes that way. So what is a hypothesis? A hypothesis is a clear statement that is testable and has a prediction. Okay, I'm hypothesizing that it is going to rain 2 days next week. Okay, it's testable. It can be proven correct. It can be proven wrong, and it's very clear. Okay, when we ordinary human beings use the word theory, what we mean is any old cockamamie idea that comes into our head. My theory as to why my brother-in-law is a jerk is bada boom. Or as my niece used to say, well, it's just my theory. And I had to sit her down and get her to stop using that word, because when a scientist says theory, what they mean is a coherent series of hypotheses, a coherent major collection. I'm not going to I'm going to say paradigm, okay? An overused word, that is going to predict a whole series of things. It explains a whole bunch of things and doesn't leave anything out. Okay, so why is it that human beings and chimpanzees and monkeys and oak trees and grass and deer all have the same DNA structure? Okay, one theory is that we have a common ancestry, and that when we've got, excuse me, I've got various hypotheses that are consistent with that. Okay, so we've got natural selection, and we've got this, and we've got that. That all are part of this theory, the unitary theory of the evolution of all life on Earth, from bacteria and viruses to human beings. Okay, that's one coherent theory. There's another theory, which is not a science theory, that a deity created everything on Earth, and for some unaccountable reason decided that everything was going to use the same DNA, you know, and there was going to be all this evidence of common ancestry just to confuse us all. That is not science, because it is not refutable. It can't be proven, and it can't be refuted. Right? You can't prove that a deity didn't create all these things. The only thing you can say is that that's really convoluted, and it's really unlikely that that a supreme being would plant all this evidence of common ancestry just to drive us nuts and convince us that that life really does have a common ancestry. I mean, that's mean, and it's hard to imagine, a loving deity wanting to do that. So, but it's very important to understand that while science can answer questions like what and how and where, and even in some cases why, there are a bunch of whys that are really important for human life that science cannot answer. For example, why should I be good and kind? A psychologist can say, well, there's a practical reason, which is that the more people are good and kind, the more other people will be good and kind, and then we'll have a good and kind society. But that is really, really weak. The questions of morality and meaning, what is the meaning of my life? Science cannot answer that. That is the realm of philosophy and spirituality and religion. Those aspects of being a human being, which have been with us arguably for a very long time, possibly millions of years, at least 100,000 years, are very important, but they are not science. So I'm not going to be talking about them today. Okay, you can go to soaringdragon.biz, and lots of stuff there involving discussions of philosophy, but that's not science, so we're not going to discuss that right now. Okay, some key terms in biology. DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, is basically a building plan for every structural component in an organism's body, and that includes the production of proteins and the things that happen during development, when certain genes should turn on, when they should turn off. So embryology and fetology before you're born, your development through your childhood, puberty, menopause, senescence, and death. The whole thing is laid out, blueprint fashion, in your DNA. RNA is generally has a messenger component to it. It brings the DNA, it transcribes DNA instructions and brings it out to other components inside the cell to create proteins and so forth. We're not going to get into cellular biology right now. Some viruses have RNA instead of DNA because they're so tiny and they've got such little small amounts of instructions going on. Nuclear DNA is inside your nucleus. That's where you've got one chromosome from mom and one chromosome from dad. And that gets mixed and matched with every generation. Okay? Mitochondrial DNA is DNA that is in your mitochondria. Every cell in your body has mitochondria, and they are all descended from the mitochondria that were in the original egg cell that you developed from. Your dad's sperm just had nuclear DNA, and that's it. So every cell in your body has nuclear DNA from mom and dad and mitochondrial DNA just from your mother. And every mother back 7 million years and back beyond that as well. So, and if you're a man, you have some DNA that is in your, that's on your Y chromosome that you didn't get from your mother, obviously, that you got from all your paternal ancestors way back on and on and on. So that mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosome DNA can be, or the Y chromosome, chromosome by itself, can be studied very effectively for clues to who migrated where and how long people have been in a particular place, because it doesn't get mixed up with every generation. It's copied in its entirety. Okay, now a chromosome is this long structure that is composed of genes, and a gene is a series of instructions that are programming for a particular action. There's a protein that is going to be created, and here are the instructions, okay? There are other non-coding locations, loci. If you studied Latin when you were a kid, I'm odd, so I studied Latin when I was a kid. Locus is means a place, a location, and loci is the plural of words that end in us. So the non coding, the non-genes, but portions of the DNA will have instructions that either suppress the action of a gene or enhance. They will turn genes on, turn genes off, and modify how the gene acts. So, for example, a long time ago, I'm not a whale expert, so I can't tell you exactly when, the ancestors of today's whales were living on the land, and several species decided to start living in the shallow water, and so they still had legs. And then they started swimming some more in the deeper water, and they still had legs. And at some point, the legs disappeared because whales don't have legs. And recently, it was discovered that the gene for legs can get turned off by the action of one of these. It's an on-off switch, basically, in the non-coding location. So instead of it, being a gradual process of long legs and then progressively shorter and shorter legs, it's very possible that somebody was born with the gene turned off, and wow, this was an advantage when you're swimming through the water. And that person or whale left better, healthier children, and gradually that mutation, a mutation, spread through the whole the whole population, right? Now, with genes that code for some specific action, you can have many versions of the instructions at that particular location. For example, eye color. You can have an allele for brown eyes. You can have an allele for green or blue, and eye color is actually controlled by a number of different genes, but for most of them don't have a huge impact on the ultimate product. So let's pretend that it's just one gene, and you've got different alleles: the brown, the green, the blue. Okay, and a combination of those alleles, from mom and dad, will lead to all the different eye colors, right? And another thing that that you need to know is what your genes say is your genotype. What any person looking at you can observe is your phenotype. So, for example, my biological dad had very dark eyes. Okay, he married a woman who had blue eyes, and I ended up, if you remember the beginning of this video, with blue eyes. So his phenotype was very dark brown eyes, but his genotype must have been one brown gene and one blue gene. And in fact, his mother had blue eyes. So I can tell, even though if I'd never seen my grandparents, I could tell just by looking at myself and as an example of what came out of that combination of brown eyes and blue eyes, that his genotype has to be brown and blue, even though looking at him, you couldn't tell. Okay? So, how are some of the ways that genes can change, can get mixed up? A lot of what we consider diseases and problems are the result of copy errors. There's a gene for something really important, like hemoglobin, and there's a copy error, and hemoglobin comes out wrong somehow. It's when, and this error, when this hemoglobin which is inside your red blood cells, when it gets into a low oxygen environment, like inside a capillary, the smallest of the blood vessels, it starts to fold in on itself. It makes a crescent shape rather than being a normal globular or flattened disc red blood cell. It starts to look like a sickle, right? That was originally a copy error, but it turned out to be advantageous if all of your red blood cells sickle. It's very, very dangerous, and in the absence of modern biology, you'll die, generally in childhood. But if you get a sickle gene from one of your parents and a normal, healthy hemoglobin gene from another parent, so you're a heterozygote, you're a, you're half and half, right? And you are living in a malaria environment, you are more likely to succeed and have healthy children than somebody who got a double dose of the normal hemoglobin. People with normal hemoglobin die of malaria. People with a double dose of sickle disease, this altered, erroneous hemoglobin, die of sickle disease. and the person who's got one of each survives. And that is why there's such a high percentage of sickle genes in people living in malarial environments or whose ancestors lived in malarial environments. So people in Central Africa or African Americans whose ancestors, for whom, you know, your ancestors, this was an advantageous condition. It kept them alive. But you're living in America, and this is the 21st century. It's no longer necessary to have a biological defense against malaria. We've got modern medicine for that. Okay. Another thing, so you can get copy errors. You can also have crossovers where one chromosome crosses over with another, and the genes that used to be on chromosome 1 are now on chromosome 2 and vice versa. Okay, so you can end up with two genes right next to each other and possibly interacting with each other in new ways that lead to new phenotypes. Okay, and last but not least, what can happen is chemicals that get into mom's body or dad's body can damage genes before you become you. Excuse me. And that you can also have gene, of course, damage in the individual during development or during their lifespan. But epigenetics shows how you can bequeath things to your children that were not in your genes, because your genes change because of mutations caused by chemicals. Okay, so how does biological change occur? And you don't have the diagram in front of you. So anyway, think about a bell-shaped curve, or at least think about any population of people, plants, whatever that you've ever known. Variation is going to exist in all populations because that nuclear DNA is mixing and matching. You've got crossover occurring. So children are not carbon copies of, they're not clones of their parents. You're going to have all kinds of variation occurring. And this is the raw engine of natural selection. It's wonderful. Okay, now some combinations of genes or behaviors generated by culture, if you're talking about humans or chimpanzees or something that's got culture. Anyway, let's just think about biology, okay? Some genes will allow some members of the population to avoid predators, okay? So they live long enough to reproduce. Others may allow you're very good at finding food and water. You've got a better than average nose. If you're an ancestral dog, you're better at finding mates. You, for whatever reason, maybe because you've got an intermediate genetic structure, you're half sickle-celled, you can raise healthy young who in turn avoid death until they rear their offspring. Okay, so the gene combinations that are going to be present 5 generations on represent something that is subtly different from the gene combinations that were present in your generation, just because predators don't kill at random, right? They're going to kill individuals who are slower or a little dumber, or some cases just plain unlucky. So whoever survives, whatever specific variation they had, is going to be present in the next generation. Okay. Now, Charles Darwin and others refer to this as natural selection. Now, and Charles Darwin noticed, he studied what I think it was pigeon breeders were doing. They were artificially doing the same thing, choosing the characteristics that they wanted and mating particular birds to get more of whatever it was they were looking for. Okay, that's how we domesticated plants. It's how we domesticated animals. There's a research experiment that's been going on in Siberia. They domesticated foxes. In less than 10 generations, they had a fully domesticated fox from wild foxes just by choosing the friendliest, the most people-oriented, face-licking individuals, so that you got a friendlier and friendlier and friendlier and more people-oriented fox, until you've got an animal that's just like a dog, only cuter. Sorry, I love those foxes. Okay, so where does variation come from? You get recombination of what already exists. Joe marries Sally and produces some variation. Chromosomes cross over, you've got errors, okay? You've got something known as genetic drift, which is basically the predators that just, Bob is just as fast as Mike. Mike was just unlucky. So what Bob's got becomes more common just by pure chance, okay? And then there's things that arise out of nothing. The mutation, which is caused by cosmic rays that change the DNA inside of eggs and sperm. Most mutations, like most errors of copying, cause disease because they're errors, all right? They're wrong. You want normal hemoglobin, most of the places in the world. If you're an Inuit living in Alaska, you do not need the sickle mutation, thank you very much. And so mutation is where most of these totally new, as human evolution, changes in the skull and the teeth, it comes from mutation. Okay, what is it that's changing? DNA. What causes the mutation? Usually it's cosmic rays, X-rays and stuff like that. Oh yeah, and one of the most famous mutations, blue eyes, popped into existence by accident about 10,000 years ago in Central Europe. And for reasons that could be related to natural selection, or it could be just pure chance, blue eyes became popular, especially in the northern high latitudes, so Scandinavia, northern Germany, northern Britain, Scotland, and so on. So, which has led some people to think that there's probably some kind of advantage to having blonde hair and blue eyes if you're, in the land where the sun doesn't come out for, 6 months out of the year, whatever. I'm exaggerating slightly, but it is also possible that it was genetic drift. So in any case, my kind of people, at least in terms of the eyes, have only been around for about 10,000 years. So how does natural selection work? It's very, very, very crucial, important that natural selection works on individuals. We'll say Homo sapiens outcompeted the Neanderthals, but what we mean is there was something about the individual Homo sapiens, and it's probably, I'll tell you, right now, you don't have to wait for episode 3, it was probably the simple fact that humans and Neanderthals overhunted the Pleistocene big animals, and there was nothing left except smaller animals as the climate changed. And our ancestors could get by on 2,000 calories a day. The Neanderthals needed 4,000 calories a day. Some proof for this in that when you look at what the Neanderthals died of, in a lot of cases, it appears to be starvation. So our ancestors were eating all the animals, and the Neanderthals starved. That's super, super, super oversimplified. Okay, so take the third class. All right, it's important to know that natural selection is not directed. Okay, so the gene pool doesn't decide, oh, it really would be great. We're all whales. It really would be great if we didn't have legs causing drag in the water. We could swim a lot faster and catch more fish if we didn't have these darn legs. So let's get rid of them. Somebody was born with this new mutation, this non-coding area, turned the gene for legs off. Whales still have a gene in their DNA for legs. It's just that there's this non-coding section that turns it off. So whales are born without legs. Okay, it's not directed. Humans need a better low back, because there's way too much pain and injury. And, if we could direct natural selection, our children would be born with stronger lower spines, so that they could withstand the effects of, gravity on the S-curve, blah, 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 blah. But it's not happening, because that's not how natural selection works. We're going to have some people that are accidentally get a mutation for stronger spines, and they're going to have to, biologically outcompete, which is going to be very, very hard with 9 billion people. It's much harder for biological change to ripple through 9 billion people than it was back when there were only 2,000 human beings on planet Earth in one tiny little area of Africa. Okay, so the primary goal of life then is protecting your children and your extended biological kin. That is why it makes good evolutionary sense to jump into a raging river to save your sister's child, because they're also related to you, or sacrificing your life to scare off a predator to save your family, because your family is biologically related to you. So anyway, we'll get into that in more detail later. All right, I am going to skip strategies and talk about social group membership. All right, primates, which is monkeys, apes, and humans, all of our close cousins. Most human groups are composed of kin. I'm so sorry about this interruption. Most groups, social groups in humans, are composed of kin. Also monkeys and some species of apes. Now, if I die but all my cousins survive, right, I sacrifice my life to lure a predator away, my genes are going to survive. The DNA that's related to me is going to survive, and there's 6 of them, so 6 times. That's referred to as kin selection. Okay, and when you look at why do mammals in general share so much with each other? Humans do the most food sharing. We'll get into that in the next class. Humans do the most food sharing of all the primates, but a lot of primates will share a nesting area. They'll share, they'll go on cooperative hunts, or hunting for vegetables or to kill things. Now, humans also create groups um, composed of non-kin, okay? And when we get to the social anthropology, which has already been recorded, and that's Anthro is Fun, class number 4, will explain why it actually makes very good biological sense to lose your life saving or even trying to save the chieftain's son or daughter. All right, some more terms. Oh my goodness, vocabulary. A species is a collection of individuals that can mate with each other and produce 100% viable offspring. Okay, so you've got enough in common with each other that there'll be no loss of fertility because your genome is in common. Okay, a genus is the larger classification. So in Homo sapiens, sapiens is our species name. Homo is a genus. Okay, so it's a collection of species that are all closely enough related to each other that they form a supergroup. For example, 2 million years ago, Homo erectus. 1.5 million years ago, Homo erectus, right? Homo heidelbergensis. Possibly Homo naledi, possibly Homo habilis, but for the last 200,000 years, we've all been Homo sapiens, right? Okay, hominin. Oh, and a family is a collection of genuses, genera, that are all closely related. So Homo and Australopithecus and some other genera are a family. Now, hominin and hominid. A hominid is everything in the human ancestry, so 7 million years, all those individuals, whether they are direct ancestors of ours or not, plus all the genera of African apes, because they're so closely related to us. So chimpanzees, gorillas, and bonobos, right? They're all hominids. Hominin is a term that applies only to the human lineage. Okay, speciation is the process by which a species, a single genome, a freely mating group, becomes 2 or more. And generally what will happen is some part of that species will get cut off from the rest of the mating pool long enough for enough mutations to accumulate that the cutoff group looks and is genetically different enough that we say, they can't mate back with the old species and have 100% fertility. There's been enough distance, biologically speaking, that it's a new species. It's difficult to be making these decisions when all you have are fossils. And in some cases, it's not a complete skeleton. It's just a tooth, or it's a half of a skull and a toe bone, But that doesn't stop people from having fun anyway. So Speciation is the process of creating new species through isolation of some sort. It could be that things are crowded, and a group of individuals decides to trek across the desert to see what's on the other side, to see whether the desert goes on forever and ever and ever, or whether there's the land of milk and honey on the other side, or they cross a mountain range, or they decide to set up housekeeping on the other side of a deep and fast, broad river, and they never go back. In some cases, as little as one mated pair of something can, be blown across to an island, to an isolated island, and a new species will arise. Okay, gene flow is what keeps a population one species. So people aren't just marrying and mating with people in their immediate space. People are swapping, having marriage treaties with, people in the next town or across the river or whatever, with enough frequency that differences can't accumulate. For example, seagoing crocodiles in Indonesia and Australia, some of those Pacific islands, are in many cases are one species because they have the ability to swim from island to island, which means that they find mates on different islands and the genes flow. Genetic drift is changes to the genetic mix caused by the accumulation of mutations caused by accident. Okay, it just so happens that blue eyes arose in this one village, and before anybody with blue eyes can marry somebody in a nearby village, there's an avalanche and all the blue-eyed people die. Right? So you could have a population that ends up remaining brown-eyed forever because of a pure accident. Meanwhile, the place where this original blue-eyed family came from continues and survives, and so blue eyes survive, elsewhere. Founder's effect is what happened in the Americas. People came to this new world, paddling along the coast as long ago as 40,000 years ago, when the first kayaks were developed. And then again, most of the ancestors of today's modern Native Americans came through the ice-free corridor at 25,000 years ago. And then 12,000 years ago and 9,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Inuit and the Aleuts came across from Asia. So whatever small percentage of the total human genome happened to be in that small number of people who, found America 40,000 and then 25,000 years ago, whatever little quirks their genome, their genes had, that is what today's Native Americans have. So everybody in America, prior to the arrival of Europeans, had type O blood, because the people of East Asia didn't have type B blood and didn't have type A blood 40,000 years ago and 25,000 years ago. Bee blood came to the New World. Goodness gracious. Me and my technology. So bee blood came to the New World with the Aleuts and the Inuit, because at 10,000 years ago, 12,000 years ago, there was bee-type blood, which arose in the Mongolia area, and then spread from there through historical events that you're aware of. A niche is the whole conglomeration of what a species eats, where they live, how they make a living, how they find mates, all the things that go into their way of life. Okay, so you could in our past, I believe that we had two different species, in some cases two different genera of hominins living in the same part of Africa. But for example, one species was, out in the dry savanna, and one was in mixed woodland. They were eating different things. So they weren't competing with each other. It's like, go ahead and eat the nuts and seeds because I'm going to eat the fruit. We're not competing with each other. Okay. Homologies are structures that are the same in two species because they have a common ancestor. Okay. So fish and mammals and reptiles all have a humerus, and the reason they've got the same bone that is in the same place doing approximately the same thing is because they've got a common ancestor, right? If you go back far enough, we were all fish. So isn't that fun? Okay, and I am now going to hopefully get back to, yes, woohoo, my face. This is class number 1A. We'll have some more fun, and we'll have class 1B in the future. So remember, more information, go to about me, go to soaringdragon.biz. If you want to play around in Facebook, I have a Facebook group called Healing Minds, Healing Bodies. I have some other Facebook groups, but that's probably the one you'd be interested in. I'm on Pinterest. You can find me in LinkedIn, Victoria C. Leo. And I'm looking forward. Any questions? Send me an email. victoria.leo.reiki, REIKI, @gmail.com. And I'm looking forward to spending some more time with you in the wonderful world of anthropology. Thank you for joining me.